Welcome to Legendary Talks, a My Spring Harvest podcast bringing you the best sermons, Bible studies and seminars from over the decades. Today we're hearing from humanitarian and former hostage Terry Waite as he shares about his time in captivity back at Spring Harvest 2023.
Wow, you're the only person I know who gets a standing ovation before they've said anything. Terry, it is so lovely to have you here. Thank you so much for coming. We really do appreciate it. And we'd love you, if you feel comfortable, just to remind us a little bit of your story and how you came to be in captivity and what it was like.
Well, let me say, first of all, that it's good to see you again. I was due to do an event with Patrick a few weeks ago, but alas, I succumbed to the dreaded COVID, which I'm clear of now, and I hope everybody here is. The last time, by the way, I was in Butlins was in 1968.
You obviously like it here.
I was going to say, they haven't redecorated. That's not true. It wasn't this Butlins, actually. It was in Minehead. And I was working at the time for the then Bishop of Bristol. And he took the whole clergy away. And I went with my wife and 3 children. And we lived in a chalet. Yeah.
I'm glad you got out of there. That was a good...
Later on, I had more comfortable accommodation in Beirut.
If you can not tweet that out, that would be really helpful to all the members of Spring Harvest. That would be fantastic.
No, that, really again, that's not true.
That's not true, yes.
But I couldn't resist it.
You'll discover Terry has a very naughty sense of humour, so you'll discover that as you go along.
Anyway, there we are. You asked me a question.
Yeah, as usual.
I'll probably try and give you an answer now. Well, I spent much of my life working in difficult parts of the world. I first of all started off as an education advisor to the then Bishop of Bristol on his staff. And after a few years, decided that I would go to Africa. And I went with my wife and 3 young children to Uganda to be an advisor to the first African Archbishop of Uganda, Erika Sabiti. And Leslie Brown, who'd been Archbishop, he was the last European Archbishop, and Erika was the first African. And he was a remarkable man, but he inherited, the old colonial system, which had its good side and its poor side. But he inherited tremendous difficulties, tribal difficulties. And although tribal difficulties were dismissed by the locals, in fact, they were very strong indeed. Obote was the president. He came to power as president. He came from the north, and Kampala, the capital, is in the south with a different tribe. And that tribe in the south never accepted him. And then there was a coup, and General Amin came to power. I don't know if any of you have seen that film, The Last King of Scotland, which portrays what happened when Amin came to power. My wife and I lived there. We were held up twice. We lost 2 cars. We almost lost our lives on 2 occasions. Many of my colleagues were taken and thrown into the concentration camps where they suffered abysmally, and many were murdered. And an illustration I've often used, which is that between Kampala, the capital, and a town called Jinja, which is about 60 miles away, halfway runs the River Nile. And the River Nile, that's the source of the Nile, actually, when Speke discovered the source of the Nile quite a long time ago now. However, there's a dam there called the Owen Falls Dam, providing hydropower for the country. And can you believe it? That dam became blocked with the bodies of people who'd been murdered and thrown into the River Nile. It's horrific when you think of it, but that gives you an idea of the scale of the atrocities that were committed. As I said, some of my colleagues were imprisoned. I went to visit them, and I was able to negotiate directly with General Amin for the release of some, and which I got, but a few. No payment made, because I never believe in paying money for the release of hostages. And that was my first experience of negotiating at that level with someone who had power, had seized power. Later on, when I left Uganda, I then traveled the world, based in Rome this time. I was seconded to Rome, and my job there was to visit schools and hospitals, principally hospitals, around the country, to help them change from the emphasis on preventative medicine, on curative medicine to preventative medicine. Because what happens in situations like that is that someone in a local village becomes infected with internal parasites. They go into the hospital, they get cleared up, they come out again, and in no time at all, they're reinfected, a circular process. So what you have to do is break that chain, if you can, and develop better health resources in the villages. Well, that was a global program which I worked on for 7 years. At that point, then I was recruited by Robert Runcie, Archbishop of Canterbury, to be his advisor, to travel with him around the world, to advise him on his relationships with heads of state, with heads of churches, and to be available to deal with special problems as they arose. And that, of course, is how one became involved very deeply with hostage-taking from my base in Lambeth Palace. When I was approached, initially in Iran, when I went to Iran to secure the release of people in Iran, what happened was, you see, families came to hostage-taking in those days. It was in its early stages, but it was very, very common. You know, a lot of people were being taken hostage. And families were in distress. They were in touch with the Foreign Office, but the Foreign Office wasn't particularly good at relating to people. They were very good at their job, but not at the pastoral side of things. And families felt isolated. They felt, we don't know what's going on, what's taking place. And so they came to Lambeth and said, look, can you help us? Because people had been taken in Iran. And I said to the Archbishop, the only way we can deal with this is for me to get out there. Because I've always had this belief that if anybody turns to the church for assistance, whether they have religious belief or not, that should not count. What should count is that the church should be open and available to all people for assistance and help. So I went out there, and you can ask me about it in detail if you wish later, but I was able to secure their release. Later on came Gaddafi, negotiating with Gaddafi, and later on came Beirut, where I was captured. And just one thing about that before I stop this long screed. One thing about that is, if you engage in the dangerous work of securing release of hostages, you must face the fact that you stand a chance of either being killed or captured. And if you're not willing to take that chance, then don't do the job. Because the chances are, one day, something may go wrong.
Yeah. And tell us a little bit around what it was like for you in captivity. What were the conditions? Where were you kept? Who did you see? Or more likely, who didn't you see? Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, I think we've got to go back a bit to Beirut. Again, you may remember the names of John McCarthy, Brian Keenan, and then there were others, Terry Anderson from America. Many different nationalities were there. And no one knew where they were, really. They knew they'd been captured in Beirut, but nobody knew how to get to them. The families came to Lambeth and said, look, John's parents came. They're both dead now, but they came and they said, look, can you help us? And I said, I'm sorry, I can't take on another case. I'm just so busy with other things. They came back 3 times. And on the third occasion, I said, right, I'll give it a try. But knowing full well that if you take up a case on behalf of people who are grieving and are in difficulty, you should stay with it until such time as it might become dangerous for the captives themselves. If it's dangerous for them, your involvement, then you should stop it, but you've got to face the danger yourself. And so, on the third time, I agreed. Now, the thing is, nobody knew where these men were. Beirut, yes, but where? They didn't even know whether they'd been shipped out of Beirut or not. And so I had to find a way of getting that information. What I did, I took a high public profile. I went on the media, the Middle Eastern media. I made many broadcasts, so many that people accused me of grandstanding, saying, oh, that fellow just putting himself up for publicity's sake, but it wasn't. And it worked, because one day, someone came into my office, Myron Belkind, that was his name. He was the Associated Press representative in London. And the Associated Press representative in Beirut was in captivity, or believed to be. He was there. And he handed me a slip of paper. And on this paper, there was a message. And it said, we're the people you want to see, come and see us. And the important point was that that message was signed by 4 people whom we believed were taken hostage. Now, the first thing you do, you check the signatures, correct signatures. It was years later I discovered what had happened. The scheme that I devised, to go take a high public profile had worked. The captors had heard this. They decided they wanted to speak with me. They went into the cell where these men were kept. They gave them a bit of paper and said, sign it. They signed it with that message. That paper was then taken, wrapped around a stone. They got into a car. They threw that stone into the doorway of Associated Press. The staff on duty picked it up, read the message, recognized its importance, transmitted it to London, and it came to me. And that's how I got the first contact, a devious way. So I went out there, and, meeting with captors is tricky, put it mildly, because you never know who you're dealing with. I mean, they can be very, understandably, highly suspicious. You put one foot wrong, and you've had it. But first of all, you've got to meet with them. So I stayed in Terry Anderson's apartment, and I got a message to say that they would contact me on a shortwave radio. And the Associated Press put the radio in the flat. And I tuned in. Nothing happened. And then one evening, the telephone rang. And I answered it. Someone said, we're the people you want to see. Come and meet us tonight at a petrol station nearby, gas station. Well, there was no way I could just go on the basis of that telephone call, because people were being taken left, right, and center off the streets. It could have been a hoax. It could have been anything. One of the things you have to be able to do in that sort of business is you have to be able to think quickly and think on your feet. And so I said to him, before I come and see you, will you phone me back with the nickname of a friend or girlfriend of Terry Anderson? And I knew that obscure bit of information could only be got by someone who had direct contact with Anderson or with the guards of Anderson. And in about an hour later, they phoned back and they said, the name you want is Krista. And that was the name. So, off you go. And to cut a long story short, and then I had many meetings. I went back and forth from London to Beirut, back and forth, discussing with them. They had blood relatives who were in captivity in Iraq. They were being badly dealt with, badly treated. They wanted better treatment. I said I'd try and help. In Kuwait, rather, not Iraq. And I couldn't make much progress. 2 hostages were released. And I went to meet them in Wiesbaden. They were Americans. And they went to Wiesbaden when they came out. But not much progress was made. And then a strange thing happened, because a hostage was released by the name of David Jacobson, American. And David believed fully that I'd secured his release, and I couldn't think what I'd done at all. I met him in Wiesbaden, and he was full of gratitude to me, and I said, David, I can't think what has happened here. I've not made progress at all on this case. And then the bombshell. I was waiting in Wiesbaden to come back home, and the phone rang. And I went and answered it. They said, have you heard the news? I said, what news? They said, the story is that hostages have been released, Jacobson's been released as a result of arms dealing. And my stomach fell. And the name, which some of you may remember, Colonel Oliver North. Colonel Oliver North was the special envoy of the President of the USA. And I knew him. You meet all these people in this sort of business. So I rang him. I rang the White House because I got their number, and he had a direct line in the...
As you do.
As you do. And I asked to speak with him. I got through to him. I said, what's going on? What is this? Don't worry, it'll be over in a few days. I knew it wouldn't be. I came back to London, and my name and the name of the church was being associated with North, with arms dealing. And I thought, we can't allow that. That is totally wrong. We've always said we will have nothing to do with arms and exchange for release of people. And so I think this is probably one of the most difficult decisions of my life. The Archbishop said to me, pull out, you can't go back. I said, I have to go back. If I don't go back, not only my name will be darkened for the rest of my life, bad enough as it is, but I mean, it'll be darkened, but also the name of the church. We've got to clear it. He said, you're walking into a trap. I said, I must go. I said, if I don't go, then, if you won't let me go, I shall have to resign and go. And at that point, he said, all right. So he didn't send me. I mean, it's often said he sent me. He didn't. And he didn't want me to go. And I wouldn't have wanted any of my staff to go if I'd been in that position. So he should be cleared of that charge. It was my responsibility, not his at that point. So I went back and waited. Hardest part of this business is waiting. I waited and waited in the apartment. Then again, the phone rang. And they said, "Are you coming to see us?" I said, "Yes." So they said, "Same place," which was a doctor's consulting room where I met them, usually. So the next night, I went there to the doctor's consulting room and was sat with the doctor for a while. Then my contact came into the room and he said, "This is a bad business." I assume he was referring to all the business of publicity. I said, "Yes." He said, "In the past, you've asked to see the hostages. We haven't allowed it. They've given me photographs, proof of life, but they've never allowed me to see them. This time you can, because one man is ill and he'll probably die." And I said, "If I come with you, you'll keep me." He said, "No." I said, "Give me your word." He said, "All right." So I said, "Give me 24 hours to think about it, please." He said, "Okay." So he went away, and I talked with the doctor, who was the intermediary. And the doctor said, "Well, you should be okay, but who knows?" I got 3 sets of advice. Don't go near it. You should be okay, and you will be okay. My decision. And my decision was based on the following. I think if ever we do things for other people, I made this point, and I firmly believe it. If ever we do things for other people, we're often doing something for ourselves, consciously or unconsciously. And in this case, I felt this, that if I have been invited to see this man, if they're telling me the truth, and if I haven't got the courage of my conviction to go and see him, then I'm going to have to live with my conscience for the rest of my life. So the next night I went. I remember this vividly. It was a rainy, dark night, and I took the AP driver to the end of the road. Then I got out and I walked up the street. Beirut was under siege, it was a civil war. There was fighting in the streets, dreadful situation. But I walked up the street, got to the doctor's apartment, waited a minute, and then the doctor said, the phone rang, and the doctor said, "I'm sorry, I have to leave you." He said, "There's an emergency at the hospital." I said, "Look, can't you wait a minute? Can't you hold on?" He said, "No, I must go now." And he put the phone down and left. He said, "When you leave, close the door behind you." And I sat there, and I remember walking up and down that apartment thinking, should I stay? Should I go? I thought, no, you've come so far, stay. And then the elevator came up because we were on the 2nd floor. And he came into the room, my contact. "Are you ready?" "Yep." Now, the first thing, you have a pat down, see if you've got any arms. That's fine. Then I was taken downstairs, and I've been through this process many times. You get into a car, driven across town. You then get out of the car, you're blindfolded. You get into another car with armed men in the back and the front. Are driven again to a secret location, a secret apartment, where you're given a complete change of clothing. Any scars on the body are probed to see if you've got any Lakota device or anything that could enable you to be tracked. Blindfolded all the time. And then you wait. And that's the hard part. I waited 5 days, 5 nights, alone, blindfolded in this room, waiting to know whether I should get to see the ill person or not. Then after what I imagine was about 5 days, they came at night, took me down again into a car, always blindfolded, crossed town, came into what I think was an underground car park. They said, "Jump out." And in the floor, I could see a trapdoor. They said, "Jump down." And I jumped down, pushed across the room, and the door closed behind me, or slammed behind me. And when I took the blindfold off, I was in the tiled cell. And my blood ran cold because I knew these cells were tiled because they are easier to clean after people have been knocked around. And I wondered what was going to be. It was an eerie sort of place. It was an underground prison built underneath a car park with a primitive shower, primitive toilet, 4 or 5 other cells, absolute silence, not allowed to speak, make any noise whatsoever. And I was angry, very angry. I was angry with myself for taking such a risk, and I was angry with my captors. And if you're angry, I mean, anger is, I've often said it, it's a normal human emotion. We all get angry. But if anger gets the better of you, it does more harm to you than it does against those whom it's held.
Yeah.
And so I had to deal with it. And I didn't eat for a week. At the end of the week, they said, if you don't eat now, we shall make you. And by that time, I got hold of my anger and was able to use it as a more creative rather than a destructive force. So there I was. That's the story of how I got sort of held up in that place.
It's amazing. Can I just put your microphone?
Right.
There you go.
So I beg your pardon.
No, that's okay.
Okay.
And thank you so much for sharing that story with us. It's incredibly moving. And we have got hundreds of questions to get through. And so far, you've answered 2.
You wanted to say?
I said you've answered 2 questions so far. And we've got about 100 to go.
Yeah, well, far away.
Yeah, well, I'm just wondering if anyone wants to get their sleeping bag there.
We just want to take a quick break to talk to you about Spring Harvest. If you're enjoying this podcast, you should definitely join us at Minehead or Skegness. It's 5 days full of inspiring talks, heartfelt worship and family fun. On top of an amazing programme of sessions, it's hosted at Butlins, so you'll get access to the swimming pool, fun fair, play parks and so much more. It's great for all ages, a place where the whole church comes together at the pinnacle of the Christian calendar. Find out more, including dates and prices, at springharvest.org.
Terry, I know, because we know each other a little bit, that when you came back to England, tell them about the eBay situation that you faced. Do you remember when you went on eBay to buy something?
When I came back, I was always in captivity. I was chained to the wall for 23 hours and 50 minutes a day, to staples in the wall, not to a radiator. People have always said you've changed to a radiator. Can you believe it? Sometime after I came back, someone on eBay was offering for sale the radiator to which Terry Waite was.
I said sorry.
Yeah, absolutely. I couldn't believe it.
It's incredible, isn't it?
Well, the fact of the matter is that I was chained by staples to the wall. I had 1 visit to the bathroom a day with just 5 minutes in the bathroom. I had to wash my clothes, wash myself, and that was it.
Yeah.
I was blindfolded when anyone came in the room. I had no books or papers for about 4 years, 3.5 years. No companionship. I had no one to talk with. Now,
they did, though, Terry, to be fair, they did ask you to tell your story to camera once, didn't they?
Oh, they did. There are 2 stories about that. One is that, I'll tell you both those stories. One story is this, that I said to my captors, initially, when I was first there, does it not say in the Quran, you mustn't steal? Oh, no, we mustn't steal. I said, fine, how is it then you steal me from my family? And they thought for a moment. They said, well, we'd better go and ask the chief about that. So they went to ask the chief, and a couple of weeks later they came back, and I said, well, what did the chief say? And they said, the chief said, we mustn't talk to you anymore. So I had no conversation, literally. I didn't speak to anybody for almost 5 years. So.
But then you did that interview. Do you remember when you did? Well, I'm telling you because you remember.
What's that?
When you told your story to camera.
To camera, I'm going to come to that now.
Yeah.
But right early on, they said, we want to make a record of this. So, excuse me. I was blindfolded. They took me into the next room, sat me in a chair. Someone stood behind me. And then I was able to remove the blindfold, and in front of me was a man with a camera wearing a hooded mask, so I couldn't see him. And the chap behind me said, "Tell your story to the camera." Now, I was in a pretty bolshy mood, I was feeling pretty fed up. So I thought, right, you've asked for my story, you shall have it. And I started. After about 40 minutes, I was at the age of about 4.
I do find this hard to believe, to be fair. It's shocking.
And I heard this very strange noise behind me. And I couldn't work it out. It was disturbing my flow. And then I heard it again. And then I realized what it was. And this is perfectly true. The chap behind me had fallen asleep and was snoring. And it was the sound of his snoring. Are you awake at the back there?
I've heard that story so many times.
But there were not many amusing moments. I mean, there were more serious. The first year was difficult because they came into the cell. They told me to go into the next room and blindfolded again to lie down, and I was beaten on the soles of the feet with cable.
So painful.
And that's very, very painful. They were trying to get from me. They believed, the reason they took me, they believed quite wrongly that I was associated with North in espionage, which I wasn't. And I had to clear my name with them. And this was a way of trying to get that information from me, and I had nothing to give them.
Yeah.
Then they told me I had 5 hours to live. Do you want me to say that?
I was just about to ask you that, yeah.
You're going to ask me?
Yeah.
Okay, ask me.
Okay. At some point, did they tell you that you had 5 hours? 5 hours to live.
Do you know, I was going to talk about that.
I'm really relieved.
Yeah. No, they came into the cell and they said, "You've got 5 hours to live. Do you want to tell us anything?" No, nothing more. And they went out of the room, and I lay down on the floor, and I slept. I think it was my body coming to my aid to give me some respite. After what I imagined was 5 hours, they came and they took me into the next room. And I was always blindfolded. And "Did you want anything?" My throat had gone dry. For the first time in my life, dry from fear. Now, it wasn't fear of death. I mean, death is going to happen to us all sooner or later. We hope it's later, but who knows? It's a part of life. But it was a fear of how would I die? Would I be strangled, beheaded, or whatever? So they gave me a drink. I asked for water, and they gave me a drink. I said, "Do you want anything else?" I said, "Yes, I'd like to write to my family and my Archbishop and others." And they said, "You can write one letter." And I wrote this, looking beneath the blindfold, I wrote this one letter. "Want anything else?" I said, "Yes, I'd like to say a prayer." I didn't feel as though if I was right at the end of my life, I was going to be intimidated. So I said the Lord's Prayer out loud. And then they said, "Turn round." I turned round and faced the wall. And I felt cold metal at my forehead. And then they dropped it another time. And that was the end of year 1. And I was moved into good accommodation. They told me they believed me and that I was going to go home. And I waited in good accommodation for 2 weeks. And then I don't know what went wrong. I don't know to this day, 30 odd years later, what was wrong, what it was. I was then put back into normal hostage accommodation for another 4 years.
Yeah.
Another 4 years alone. So that was that.
We're getting lots of questions, and I know we've talked about this before, around faith and did you feel the presence of God, and how did your faith survive?
Well, the first thing is, never did I feel what some people claim to feel is the close presence of God. That does not mean to say that in any way one lost faith, of course not. But I think it's very dangerous to over-depend or even depend on feelings, because feelings can be occasioned by so many different things, by illness, by depression, by all sorts of things, when you feel that there's no such, that God is miles away and not with you. Faith is not dependent on feeling. If you have good feeling, that's fine. You're very fortunate. If you don't for one moment think that you have been abandoned and that you've been left. So I had faith, yes, definitely. But I never felt what some people feel, and that is that closeness, that warmth. I didn't feel it. That was just me.
Which is it's important, isn't it, to say sometimes, because I think sometimes, like you say, faith is a choice, and it was a sense that you hang on to your faith, even despite all the evidence around you in some ways, and it's incredible. Also, there's lots of questions here around forgiveness, like could you forgive your captors? Have you seen your captors since?
Oh, definitely forgive, certainly. And I look at it this way. Not for one moment do I agree with what they did. Not for one moment do I agree with violent behavior or the killing of people. Of course I don't. I don't agree with that at all. But I think the question to ask, first of all, is can you try and understand why these young men, in the main, got into that situation? Understand why they behave as they behave. Now, many of them have come from backgrounds where, in my case, in Beirut, where they were always the bottom of the pile, socially, religiously, economically, in every way. Along comes a charismatic leader, and he says to them, join this group and you'll be able to find a better way of life for yourself, for your family, and so on. They join the group. Once they're in the group, there's no way out for them. Now, I'll give an example of this. When John McCarthy, Brian Keenan were in captivity, they were together for most of the time. And the food they had became very bad. They complained about it. And nothing happened. And then after a few months, the head man came to see them, and he said, what is it you're getting? And they told him. They said, that's wrong. He said, that's wrong. And he looked into it, and he discovered that the guard who'd been given money to buy them food had spent half the money on food and pocketed the other half. So they took the guard outside and they shot him. Because they said, if you're cheaters in small matters like that, someone comes along with a big bribe, you give the whole group away. The point being of that is once these youngsters have got into that sort of a group, there's very little way out for them. And that is the same dynamic that's operative in drug gangs in this country at this moment.
So true.
Youngsters get involved in them for a variety of reasons, and before they're where they are, they can't get out, and they're knifed or they're killed or they're whatever. It happens. So the thing is to try and understand and try and deal with the root problem. And I went back to Beirut. I mean, I felt that I couldn't leave it there. I mean, years later, I went back to meet with my captors. Years before, I'd been to see them at night, was given a promise which was broken. Some years later, I went back at night. They were surprised to see me. They didn't expect me to go off because they changed. I mean, they developed into a fully fledged political party now. And I said to them, they said, well, they did apologize, actually. They said, we're sorry. They said, what can we do? What can we do to change this? I said, well, I've just come back from the border, the Lebanese border. I've seen refugees coming across there who are ill and sick and cold. Can you let me have heating oil for them? They said, yes, we'll do it. Now, it's a small gesture, but it won't make enormous political difference, but it was the beginning of a new relationship. And I think that's what we should be seeking in forgiveness. We don't condone, the old saying, love the sinner, but don't condone the sin. You can put it in that language, but put it into other language and say, you try and understand why people behave as they behave without agreeing with what they do, but try and seek for new beginning. And new opportunities. And it's not easy. It's a difficult process.
Yeah. And I think that's such an important point. You make two really important points there. One is true understanding always challenges your perspective on anything. If you really try and understand where someone's coming from, it will always, no one's born angry. And secondly, that thing about relationship is actually, God works through relationship in so many ways. And we've got to build relationships, particularly with people that aren't like us. I think that's really important.
There is the other point too, that often if you look for the best in people, you often find it, somewhere. Because there are one of the big problems, of course, with hostage groups and with other criminal groups, really, is that within those groups there are always people who are ill, who are psychopaths, psychopathically ill, who have no feeling, who will kill ruthlessly and not feel it at all. All members of those groups are not psychopaths. Some are. If you deal with a psychopath, you have great difficulty in negotiating and communicating. But not all are like that, by any means.
No,
but
definitely.
there are some, and every group has them.
Yeah. Now, we haven't got loads of time left, and I want to make sure we get to talk about your books, and I don't want you to get, rush off afterwards, because you're a convicted criminal now, aren't you? Do you remember what happened last time, Terry? Do you want to confess to people what happened?
Yeah.
Do you remember what happened?
No.
You were going a little bit too fast, weren't you?
Oh, yes. I'm sorry, I was doing an event with Patrick, and I was anxious to get away. And...
But you know what, Terry? I want to tell you that I understand you. I understand where you're coming from.
No, I was anxious to get away. And I was in one of these variable traffic zones. Oh. You set your sat-nav, not your sat-nav, your regulator, whatever you call it.
I think you need to see it from the other person's point of view, Terry, to be fair. But
you know where you are. Something drops the letterbox and said, notice of prosecution. Oh, dear. Anyway, I don't want that to happen again. Not today.
I understand. It's fine. One of the things I've often asked you, and I think it's a really important point, that so often what happens is when people hear your story, they go, oh my goodness, I've got no right to complain about my pain, because Terry Waite's story is what he's been through is so much more than what I've been through. And I've often talked about, we play top trumps with pain. And what we do is we say, your pain's worse than my pain, and then we don't deal with our pain. But actually, pain is pain, right?
Yes, pain is pain, definitely. I mean, some people say, well, I couldn't go through with what you've gone through. And I don't necessarily believe that. because who knows what the future holds for any of us. But often when you come across a situation, it's never easy in this type of situation. Of course it isn't. Mine's an extreme situation, but if you come across a situation of illness or of despair or loss of a job or whatever it might be, you can sometimes, almost inevitably, if you look hard enough, discover that you have within yourself resources, or resources are available to you to deal with it. And that disaster, seeming disaster, can be turned round to be something creative. Now, for example, in my case, when I came out of captivity, my job had been left open for me. But I decided not to take it. I decided that I would earn my own living by writing and lecturing, and that I would give my time away now to organizations which I founded, like Hostage International or Waite or Emmaus for the Homeless. I give them. I would not take money from them. I often believe that many charities, these days, have become businesses where their executives are paid vast sums, which seems to be wrong for a charity. Maybe that's my point of view. And I thought, I'm not going to get into that business. I'm going to try and earn my own, and that was years ago. So any money from any books that come up today will actually go to supporting that. And indirectly, you're supporting the charities and keeping them going, and they're doing well. They're going along.
I've heard you talk before around, which I think is a really beautiful phrase, about partnering with God, being co-partners. And explain what you mean by that.
Well, I think one of the most important understandings for me is that, let me put it this way, I'll try and sum it up very, very simply, that life, in fact, is a mystery. Why we're here, where we're going, the age-old questions, which face all of us at some time or other. And part of the purpose of life, and God himself is a great, or whatever you might know, if you want to get into gender terms now, him or her, I think that's immaterial. That's peripheral stuff. What really matters is the fact that God's a great mystery. A great mystery. We have some revelation as to the true nature understanding of God, if you can put it like that. But life, the process of life, is growing towards a deeper understanding of the mystery that lies deep within us and beyond us. And that we have to take responsibility. Part of the purpose of life is to grow into harmony with ourselves, with our neighbor, and with our environment, to be in harmony with that great mystery. And that we are co-creators with God. It isn't a case of God up there creating like that. It's our participation in that whole process, and we create or we destroy. And at the moment, I'm gravely, gravely disturbed, as I think most people in this room would be, at the way in which we are destroying our environment. We're destroying the planet. We're destroying ourselves with all sorts of stupidity. And somehow we need just to get back to the simple understandings. We are responsible. We are the creators. We make this life for ourselves. We make this world in cooperation with God. We either make it or we break it. And at the moment, we're breaking so much. What is the sense? What is the sense of some of the things that's happening at the moment? No sense at all.
No. And I do love that phrase, co-creators, partners, that sense of working with, not just doing things for, which is what you've done so much of your life. You went through so much trauma. You came back. Adjusting to normal life must have been quite challenging for you. I know you've often talked to me, we talked, didn't we, during COVID, about how actually everything's a rush and that we do need to go gently during this time. And how did you recover from that trauma? How long did it take? Or are you still recovering from it?
Well, I think if you've been through an experience, you're always scarred by it. I mean, you live with that. I mean, if you've been physically, seriously wounded, you've got the scar of that, and it'll be with you throughout life. But it needn't be detrimental. It can be utilized. The fact is that one of the great gifts I got from that is that in captivity, before captivity, I'd always had sympathy for people who were on the margins of life, the prisoner or the person who suffered various disadvantages through no fault of their own, or whatever, But that sympathy in captivity was changed to empathy. Sympathy is to feel sorry for. Empathy is to know what it's like to have nothing, to know what it's like to be kicked around, to know what it's like to be treated as less than a human being. And to have that was a gift from captivity, to have that empathy. In suffering, don't underestimate it. Suffering is always exceptionally difficult. But in the vast majority of cases, suffering need not destroy. Something creative can emerge from it. And there are many people who will be going through at this time of deprivation and difficulty in our country and in the world, suffering. But somehow it can, in the majority of cases, be utilized creatively. And everybody has to find that for themselves. But one of the great things also about being together as we are together today, like this, is that it's not just an individual effort. We need each other.
Yeah.
We need to be able to understand and support each other. And that's one of the great functions of the church, to do that.
Yeah.
To do it properly, without discrimination.
Yeah, fantastic. And tell us the deep sea diving illustration. That really helped me coming out of lockdown. Do you remember about the deep sea divers who told me on Zoom?
Where was this?
Do you remember we were on Zoom on a computer and you talked about coming up gently, the deep sea divers? When you go.
Oh, yes.
This was great because this really helped me through lockdown.
Sorry. I'm getting old now. I can't always understand these young people. Yeah, I'll be 84 this year. Yeah.
Really?
Yeah, 84, yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. I sometimes say to myself, can you believe it? In 6 years, you'll be 90.
That is true.
Sobering thought, isn't it? I mean, he's talking about diving, yeah. I've often used the analogy that when you come out of a situation of trauma, take it as though you're coming up from the seabed. If you come up too quickly, you get the bends, nitrogen in the blood, and it does you no good. But if you take it gently, bit at a time, fine. And that's the same with coming out of trauma. Take it gently. Take advice. Don't push yourself too hard. And there's a good chance with proper support, it can be a blessing and not a curse.
It's brilliant. It's great advice, hey?
Thanks for listening to this episode of Legendary Talks. If you enjoyed it, make sure you hit subscribe wherever you get your podcasts and visit springharvest.org to find out more.